Oh, okay. Recording has started. Great. So good afternoon. Before we begin, we want to advise everyone that today's session is being recorded so that it can be accessed in the future via the virtual faculty lounge. Thank you for joining the Center for Community-Based Learning as we provide a series of webinars for faculty members on community-based learning in the current environment. My name is Justin Sipes, and I'm the Assistant Director with the Center for Community-Based Learning. I'll be your moderator for today's session, Experiential Learning in Extraordinary Circumstances. Dr. Allery Gibbs, the Curricular Community Engagement Coordinator with the Center, will be assisting with the session. A few logistics before we get started. If you do have questions, please feel free to jump in at any time. We suggest using the Q&A feature to pose a question, or you can use the icon at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and we will unmute your microphone so that way you can ask. Allery will be monitoring these features throughout our time today. In the chat feature, we'll be providing links and points made by the panelists so that way you can keep up with the conversation. In addition, there will be a few polls for you to respond to during the session. With that being said, we're going to kick off our first poll. All right, so as we can see, looks like 2 of them are encouraged but not required, and then one of the other choices is required by program. Also recognizing we have a couple attendees who aren't directly responsible for internships or in programs, so that's why we didn't have responses from them. So good, great to see how those are sort of situated. So we are fortunate to have with us today 2 individuals who have been in the thick of it the past few months and working with students, community partners, businesses, nonprofits, agencies, faculty and staff members, basically everyone and anyone to maintain and deliver high quality experiential learning opportunities for their students in the areas of internships, practicum, field experience, and clinicals. So I'll let our 2 panelists introduce themselves and provide a little bit of background as to how their experiential learning experiences are structured within their programs. So let's start with Donnie, if you don't mind.
Hi, my name is Donnie Welch-Rawls. I am in the Doctor of Physical Therapy program, which is in the Clinical and Applied Movement Sciences department within the College of Health. And in the Doctor of Physical Therapy program, I am a clinical professor, and I do some teaching, but the main part of my job is what falls to my title of Director of Clinical Education, and that is everything having to do with the clinical education for the Doctor of Physical Therapy students. And I have been at UNF almost 11 years now, and I was in a clinical environment. Before that, I worked at Brooks Rehabilitation Hospital before I came to UNF. My role is, it is a significant part of the curriculum of the DPT program. With the students, they have 5 different community engaged clinical education experiences during their just under 3 years in the program. So each student has 5 different experiences. And it's a little bit different with us. They're all arranged through us or through me. It is not, they do not acquire these experiences on their own. They can make suggestions and they can ask for a new affiliation agreement, that sort of thing, but it is all arranged through faculty, and there are 4 full-time rotations of 8 weeks duration each, and then a practicum of very part-time throughout the spring semester of the first year, half days then. So it is a large part of the curriculum. That's it in a nutshell.
Great. Thanks, Donnie. And Bobby, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Sure. I'm Bobby Doggett, and I am an associate instructor in the School of Communication, and I teach public relations courses, but I am also the internship coordinator. And in our program, it's not as complicated as Donnie's is, but our seniors do have to do an internship in order to graduate. We do offer alternatives like a research paper or whatever for those that are working full-time or just cannot possibly do a face-to-face or now what we call remote internships. But all of our students in the School of Communication under the Bachelor of Science in Communication, which is advertising, multimedia journalism, digital video production, and public relations, all of those students are required to do an internship. And it's also required by our accrediting body because we are accredited as well in the School of Communication. One of the things that we do differently, though, is we have many sites in Jacksonville area that want interns. And so we have an application form that they have to fill out. And if they are qualified, meaning the person that's going to supervise the student has a background in communication and the duties that a student is going to do are communication related. So such as a journalism student may go to work for the Florida Times Union or may go to one of the television stations. As long as it's a reputable and credible organization, then they possibly can become an internship site. And our students then go and search for their own interns or internships. We have a website that has more than 200 sites on there, and our students can peruse through that website and find a pre-approved internship site. Now, there are still, like what Donnie said, they can recommend sites, students, but then I have to vet them very much, make sure that, because we don't know them, they haven't been vetted yet. And I'm finding now that there's a lot of students, we'll talk about that later, that are trying to get non-pre-approved sites because they're not in Jacksonville and they're not going to be here in the fall term. So I have to have the whole vetting process for that. But that's basically us in a nutshell too.
Great, thank you for that. That's actually a great segue into our next poll is asking the question, so how are students finding these experiences within their various programs? So as you can see, if everyone wouldn't mind just sort of clicking on how they might be doing that. All right. So as far as this is, students are finding on their own. As you can see, your two programs have different examples as to how students come across these. And we also know institutionally, there's lots of different ways that students are coming into these types of experiences. And right now, I'm sure it's even crazier, as sort of Bobby indicated, like, because some of the normal experiences that might have been there might not exist in the same way now. So how people are managing handling that as well, it's really should be interesting. Great, so we'll sort of get into some of the questions that we have for you all. And then if at any point in time, one of our attendees would like to ask a question, we recommend put it into the Q&A or raise your hand and we'll be able to address you as well too. So for the first question we have, I want to start on a positive note. So would each of you mind sort of sharing with us a success story from the last few months that you've had with some of your students with regards to these experiential learning opportunities? And we'll start with Bobby this time.
This time I get to be first. Yeah. Okay, well, two really good success stories is that two of my students, one in the spring was immediately hired once she graduated by her internship. And then I was just told last week that another student who was doing his internship over the summer has now been hired by the current company that he is interning with. And both were pre-approved internship sites. So that was pretty exciting for us and for those students. Other success stories are that, you know, I think everybody's learning this whole new process of not being face-to-face. And so for some, you know, it's been a challenge, but for others, they have really embraced it and enjoyed all of the things that they've learned from having to force themselves to learn this, you know, new kind of communication. So, which is really good for communication people. So.
Yes, I mean, that's exciting to hear. I think that's one of the worries right now too, is right, are students being hired in the ways that we would hope that they're being hired to? So to hear that these internships are translating into, transitioning into full-time employment is great to hear. And it vouches, right, for why internships are important. So great. Go ahead, Donnie, sorry.
I think that probably the greatest success is the fact that all of our students were able to graduate. All the May 1st graduates were able to graduate, which for a while there I did not think was possible at all. March 13th, I received 4 cancellations for the students that were already out, and then it just went from there. So that day will live in infamy with me getting 4 students canceled, and most of them were from hospital settings that day. But then as it continued Saturday, Sunday, and on into the next couple of weeks, it was all the different settings that the students are in. So we had about a 50-60% cancellation for the 30 students that were out. Due to 2 things. One is, and I just can't talk highly enough about doing everything you can to have the best relationship with the clinical partners, because that was a huge reason that we were able to place students. And if there's any way to keep track of your graduates who are out there once they become eligible to accept students and so on, trying to find a way to keep track of them and then reach out to them, particularly if you're in a problem situation. And the other aspect of it that made it work and made it possible to find replacement rotations for all the students that had been canceled so they could graduate on time was emphasizing to the students the amount of flexibility that they will need to have. Huge issue with us, at least. To me, it would apply no matter how they acquire internships or rotations. Whatever you have is that flexibility on the part of students. And then also finding out what the site needs in advance and making sure the student realizes that they need to be able to accommodate that. That was another thing for us, because it's healthcare, so it was more along lines of adequate PPE, the student agreeing to either get tested on a routine basis or other mechanisms. The student has to agree to a questionnaire with most of the sites that they fill out every day. A lot of it's similar to what UNF is doing, just more so. And so making sure the students understand that, you know, I know the new normal is a little bit overused, but it definitely applies, and make sure that students are aware of all those kind of things and the big role they have in making these experiences successful. And a lot of it is, I think, due to their flexibility, but their willingness also to accommodate to what it is that the site is requiring. So bottom line, that was the success, that all the students graduated on time. But truly, other than the 24/7 stuff I was doing, the main things are how wonderful our clinical partners are. And we have about 300, so I'm not saying we're close to all of them. But especially the Jacksonville ones, how fantastic they were to try to help us out and to help the students out, and then the role the students play.
I mean, that's tremendous that all of them were still able to graduate on time, considering the requirements that are pressed on them from making sure they have a certain amount of hours and then knowing the cancellations and things. So it's also a testament to you and your work with community partners and be able to help those students navigate those things. So I think for the next question, and Donnie, you sort of touched on this a little bit, and so feel free to continue. What was or has been the biggest challenge to addressing student needs during this period, especially since both your programs require internships for your students and clinical hours for your students?
Mhm. One of the big issues we have, other than the accommodation of students to new things that I've already touched on, is the hesitation of some students. So it was all over the spectrum with us. We had students who had no hesitation going or being or going into the clinical environment after getting canceled from one type of setting to another. No hesitation whatsoever to doing that. Fully embraced the idea of that they were in healthcare, and to do what they could to help. Other students, complete end of the spectrum. In some cases, it might have been due to an underlying condition or a family member concern and that sort of thing. But there are, were some that was not really necessarily the case with, but they were still very hesitant on a personal level. And I think that was the biggest challenge. We did, of course, we said all along, the student's choice, if they choose to not continue or to not go to a new setting or so on, that is their choice. But what that means is that experience would need to be after what would have been their graduation date. So kind of one-off experiences for them, because all of them are required, hours are required by our accrediting body, so as well as weeks. So it would not be possible for them just not to have the experience altogether. So we did have a couple of students who opted out. One thing that the faculty did that made a big difference and really allowed those students to feel comfortable with their personal decision about that was that we have always required for progression in the program that the internships must be done. So the 2 in the summer must be done before they can progress into the fall semester, academic semester. We got together as a faculty, and I mean, we're relatively small. There's only 7 of us total as far as core faculty. And we changed this year only that students are able to progress even if they did not have their internships this summer. So I feel like there was give and take on the part of the university via the faculty, and of course it had to be approved and all of that, in order to make that happen so that students could feel comfortable. But I personally had a lot of angst about it. Just how far should we go to accommodate those students who don't feel comfortable? It's a little different for me being in healthcare, because it's the same time you see in New York City all the people clapping for the healthcare workers coming out of the 7 to 3 or 3 to 11 shifts at the hospitals, and here we are saying that physical therapy needs to be an integral part of the healthcare system, but we're okay with students not going to sites during the pandemic. So it's a little bit of an adjustment for me, I have to say, but I'm fully resolved on that now. I'm okay, and have been for many months at this point. But I think that was all of that was the biggest challenge we had.
And Bobby, how about you all with your program?
Again, ours is different from Donnie's, but what I've found as the challenges that we had in the spring, of course, just like Donnie, some of our sites just immediately closed and our students were sent home. And they, so we as a faculty came together too and said, okay, look, we we understand this is an anomaly, but you know, we're going to let them move forward and do what they need to do. And so we've made some changes in the class because of that, more assignments in the class itself, and their actual contact hours have been lowered somewhat too. We are not under the licensing and accreditation like the physical therapy department, so we have a little bit more leeway. One of the major challenges I've seen over the summer too is that our sites are learning how to work remote. Our internship supervisors were just sort of thrown a loop, and they don't know how to communicate effectively with some of our students or to follow up. Like if you're working remote, you need to talk to those kids at least 2 or 3 times a week, whether it be through Zoom or, you know, email or something. And so what I found is I really had to communicate with my site supervisors and say, you've got to keep up with them, and you've got to make sure that they're doing worthwhile work, not just busy work, but worthwhile work. And so one of the challenges I'm finding now is that some sites really don't want to be an internship site right now. They've sort of stepped back, whether it's because they have, I lost 4 today, as a matter of fact, because they are, you know, concerned. They have people that are 65 years and older in their you know, office. So they're concerned about college students coming in. They're not comfortable working remote. They just don't understand the technology. Some of our older communication people, so they're not interested in working remote. So those are some of the challenges. I've also seen that kids have a real challenge, as I said, with the remote work, but they're getting better with it. And they're starting to understand that they really have to embrace it, because this may be the way they're going to get their job in the future. This may be the way they're going to work in the future. So they've got to embrace it and learn as much as they can.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We were talking about it a little before we started today too. There's like, we're all on this learning curve together as to how do we make this work. And some industries have been doing this for some time, so they're more adapt to it. And then others, this is their first foray into it. And so how everyone is trying to learn as we go. And so some are doing it quicker than others, and some have, like you've found out, Bobby, are just opting out and just saying, we can't do this right now. So, which is unfortunate, right? Because it takes away opportunity from our students who could potentially help that organization or that company ultimately. So, oh well, maybe they'll come back in the future. We'll see what happens, right? So for our next question, what, if anything, and both of you have sort of talked about this a little bit already, but what, if anything, will change for students in your programs going into this fall semester, and what might be some changes looking beyond this fall semester for internships and clinicals with your students? And Bobby, we'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll start with that one, because for me, it's the same thing. I think that a lot of sites are either do what I recommend is a hybrid type model. Whereas if you want the student to come in for 1 day a week or whatever, and you know, social distance and mask, I think that's great. And then the student then could also do the rest of their work remotely, so that you don't have that student there the whole time. And I think for some sites, they're embracing that a little bit more. They can have more control over the student, when they're going to be in the office, what hours they're going to be there, that type of thing. And so those are some of the changes. For my class personally, we, you know, through the faculty, we've decided that they're going to give them a lot more reflection assignments, which of course I have to grade, but still we have, you know, it's one thing to talk to them and just have them do their work, but I really want them to reflect on their experience now more so than we actually did before. So I think that's going to be good for the students as well, and looking at their future and where they need to go. But those are basically just some of the changes. And in the future, I do think that this remote, at least for communication personnel, not everyone can work remotely. We know that. But for communication people and in marketing and that type of thing, I think there's a lot that can be said for remote work, where you might not have to go in the office 5 days a week, be there 8 to 5 or whatever. You might have a little bit more flex time. And I'm thinking that, I do think that might be a wave. It might not happen right away, but I do think that people are going to start saying, wait a minute, do I really need to fight that traffic every day, or can I have a little bit more flex in what I can do. But that's for my major, which can do that. Other majors cannot.
Yeah, and do a quick plug. So we do have a webinar next Thursday that is talking about reflection activities with
Ooh.
regards to that Dr. Gibbs is hosting. So if you're interested, there's another opportunity next Thursday to learn and talk some more about that as well. So now back to our originally scheduled questions. Donnie, for you, what might be changing? What this upcoming semester, looking towards the future, if anything?
Well, of course, for all of the programs like ours that have a lab component, whether obviously not just healthcare, but art, music. I mean, it's just amazing, and it's been like the town halls have been very interesting to me because I think it's one of the few times where you really get to hear the concern specifically on lab type of things in courses. I mean, some of the things I just didn't even know were happening. So anyway, that's been nice. But with the lab component, I am a little worried because, of course, we're restricted on the labs of how those exactly are going to work. They still will need to take place, but still determining the specifics of that, and that influences when the students go out again, hopefully, fingers crossed, January 4th. So because one of the 3 cohorts has, the third years, has rotations again, January until graduation. So I'm a little worried about what's going to happen if they have any kind of restricted lab activity in the fall, and then they turn around and go out into the community, into the clinical sites, January 4th, how that's going to work. So far, of course, we had the same thing at the end of the spring semester, and so far this summer with that group of students has gone okay from that standpoint. Could have been a little better, but it was not a dramatic problem, thankfully. But so that is a little bit of a concern, how we're going to maximize the labs as much as we can and still stay safe and so on, so that they can do very well when they go out. The biggest thing for me, and of course this is different than a lot of people, in that our accrediting body requires a certain number of hours and weeks. They did make a concession, and they reduced it by 2 weeks. So it's 28 weeks minimum required during the program instead of 30 minimum weeks required in the program. So that has helped a lot. But the biggest issue we're having right now is that an inpatient is required. So there's various practice settings that physical therapists are in, but our students need to have at least 1 out of their 4 full-time internships needs to be an inpatient. And those, I think, as everybody knows, those are the ones that are most restricted. The skilled nursing facilities pretty much out. We have no students in skilled nursing facilities right now. Acute care hospitals, we do have some students. We have 4 students now in various acute care hospitals. But those are extremely difficult, and there are some local hospitals that are not allowing that. So I really don't know how that's going to work. So, and since we're required, unfortunately, we have, these creative ideas, everything from, using telehealth to simulation labs, to case studies, to reflection activities, on and on. But it really doesn't matter if our accrediting body requires a certain number of weeks in the actual clinical environments. But I'm anticipating that I'm not going to be able to get enough inpatient possibilities for the students. And soon, I haven't been able to start on it yet, but soon hope to have develop some sort of plan or program for those sorts of things, between especially telehealth and case studies and sim lab type activities, to try to replicate inpatient as much as possible, with the idea that maybe the accrediting body will go ahead and have some sort of additional concession for us. And some of it depends on how things go in the fall, and then certainly into the fall and into the early winter as well. We'll have to see how it goes. but I am trying to start looking at other things we can do in anticipation of hopefully the accrediting body. Of course, I have to be careful how much I hope that, because what that means is that's a reflection of how bad things are with the pandemic. So, you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's right. So if they are having to make more concessions, then clearly things aren't getting better, and that's also not good, right? In the grand scheme of things. So what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to launch our third and final poll. And for this one, what we're asking is, what is your biggest concern for these types of experiences moving forward? And with this one, you can select multiple options. All right, so with this poll, as we can see, another shutdown, yeah, that would not be good. Quality of experience for students, so, and that's already been mentioned, like making sure that students aren't in internships or practicums or clinicals where they're stuck doing the busy work and aren't actually learning something that can help them in the grand scheme. Decrease the number of opportunities for students, as we've heard, is definitely a possibility. And then the other would be interesting to see what that is. So if whoever selected other, if they would be willing to type that into the chat, what they meant by other, or what their concerns are, that'd be great. And that way we can reflect on that as a group as well too. So thank you all for responding to that one. All right, so for our next question that we have, in working with your various community partners and agencies and sites, what are some of the issues or concerns that have arisen from them? And so how have you been working with them to address those issues or concerns? So Donnie, if you want to start us off on that one, that'd be great.
Okay. I think one of the things that we've really encountered is the stress of the clinicians in this case, or just the stress of the employees or staff at any facility. That's been, of course, it varies. The hospitals in South Florida, the clinicians are so very upset and so stressed that's the really tough part of it. And I wish I had an answer for how to help with that. I try, if they're, just to acknowledge that if that's the reason they're saying they can't accept a student, then just to acknowledge it and let it go, as much as I would like to keep pressing them. So I think that's one thing. Another thing that has been a little bit of a surprise to me is that in some cases, the higher levels of the organization have made one decision, whereas the employees or the staff or the clinicians would have preferred a different decision. And it could go either way, either to the point of not allowing students or allowing students, both ways, where I've seen some differences between those two levels in the organization of how they want to approach it, which of course, causes some distress in terms of accepting students. Fortunately, it's not everybody by any stretch, but some of the larger organizations, some of the corporate places I've seen that happen. There's some of the other concerns are just the number of people with distancing That's just the sheer number of people. And we've talked about things like staggered schedules, if they have that available anyway. The students could do that, working on weekends more frequently than they would otherwise, to try to reduce the number of people. If they're open, say it's an outpatient clinic that's open from 7 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., using that to the advantage in terms of having fewer people in the schedule. But that's a real concern in a lot of places. And of course, we're not in a situation where some people can be remote unless it's with telehealth, and that's different. But otherwise, the bodies have to be there, and that's the word that a lot of the clinical people are using. We just can't have any more bodies in our area. And then, of course, the PPE, adequate PPE. And there was a time where I would tell the students, you have to provide your own, but they couldn't get it. So I was asking around in our program of who had what for, like, the cadaver lab. We have some supplies, or a lot of supplies, obviously, for the cadaver lab, and then for orthopedics and so on, and trying to get some of that kind of thing to the students, so they could be there back during that span of time where it wasn't possible to order it. And then we've also had some, this really isn't as much from the clinicians, but it affects them sometimes in our case, where the patients or the equivalent, just customers or other people coming in, wouldn't wear a mask or did not wear a mask. And of course that caused all kinds of issues and problems, particularly if the student and their clinical instructor had different viewpoints on that. And if the overarching policy and procedure either wasn't well established or had conflicts in it. So I think those are the main things I've seen.
All right, thanks, Donnie. Go, Bobby, go ahead. What are some of the things?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the mask thing, because I think that was something with our sites when they started to open up in the summer. At first, we were still all stay at home and everyone was remote. But when we started, opening back up and some of the kids were allowed to go in, we were telling them that they needed to wear masks, but the site that they were at probably wasn't encouraging that. And so that was a problem. Another major issue that we had, and I kept communicating with our students, is that, hey, if you think you've been exposed or you're starting not to feel well, don't go in. Don't let your supervisor know. Well, unfortunately, that did occur. A student had been exposed to her roommate's friend or something like that. I can't remember. And she emailed me and I told her immediately, you need to self-report, because UNF has a self-report. And I said, you need to let your supervisor know. And our hands are sort of tied in that we can't just call up the supervisor. It's more of a privacy thing. So I kept emailing her and finding out, are you okay? Did you get tested? Blah, blah, blah. Well, we come to find out later on that she never told her supervisor, and she kept going to her site until finally she left one day and her supervisor called her and said, why'd you leave early? And she goes, well, I wasn't really feeling well and I found out I tested positive. So that was awful. When I found it, the supervisor immediately called me. We talked. Her protocol was they had to shut their office down basically and quarantine for 2 weeks. Luckily, it was 11 people that they were sending home. And so one of the challenges I'm finding is I don't want them to lose trust in UNF and our students. And so that was very concerning to me. And I communicated with this woman and she did not want the student back. She said, I don't want her back for the rest of this internship. So I'm working out other options for the student so that she can at least continue on. But yeah, that was a shocker to me that it just scared me that they weren't responsible enough to let this person know, even though I kept telling her that you need to let people know if, that you could possibly be, and just step back. Don't go there. We're fine. We'll work at the hours later on. But that didn't happen.
Yeah, that's hopefully that won't be a future
No.
issue, but I think it's one of the challenges is that, right, UNF has certain policies and procedures that it has been putting in place and
Mm-hmm.
has continued to roll out. And when we're sending students out into these community environments, they might not have the same policies and procedures in place. And so how are we navigating those arenas when we're telling students one thing, they're being told another thing? And how do we make sure that we're communicating to them that, like, we need you to listen to us. We're looking out for your best interest as a student, as a person, and we want to make sure that you're safe. And so that's why the UNF has the policies and procedures that it does. That's unfortunate that what happened, and hopefully you're in a position that you can repair that relationship with that particular site, and that the student at the end of the day is okay and doing better as well too, which is also important. But I think unfortunately, we're probably going to run into more situations like that where students are putting themselves in these environments and not recognizing that, like, I might actually be making it worse for others, even though I feel like it's fine for me and I'm willing to do it. So some of those conversations might have to happen more often than we've maybe had to have in the past, right? And working with them through that, because it's new for everyone. So.
And I think Justin and probably Donnie will go along with this. I think now that more and more people are starting to wear masks and businesses are requiring people to wear masks or you're not going to get any service, I think that makes a big difference. Whereas when we were first going into this in the beginnings of the summer, that was just not there. And it was sort of like, well, if you feel like wearing one, go ahead. If you don't worry about it. So I think that's going to make some changes in our policy. We were always encouraging it, but I think the businesses now are doing it too as well.
Yeah, it definitely makes it easier, right, when everyone is sending the same message versus conflicting messages. But as we know, I mean, this has evolved from March to where we are now and will likely continue to evolve. So I think that's the other piece, right, is we're all learning as we go. And what we knew in March is different than what we know now about this particular virus. And so we've had to adapt our behavior to reflect that. So communicating that effectively to people is what's most important, that they understand the why behind that. So we have a couple more questions that we'll hit before. And again, if anyone else has questions who's out there, feel free to type them in, raise your hand, and we'll address those as well too. So with the accreditation and licensure, the program requirements that both your programs have, how have you been working with some of these outside entities to advocate for students? And Donnie, it seems like that you've been working through that, and you've gotten some leeway, and that's been great. But that can also be a challenge, right? Because these bodies are making decisions, but aren't always on the ground where you are in working directly with the students to know how these choices are affecting them. So Bobby, if you don't mind, maybe sharing a little bit.
I think ours is fairly easy in the sense that our accrediting body does leave it up to us to work out our internship program and to do what we need to do that's right for the school communication. At least that's how I've been directed from my departmental chair. So we're lucky in that respect. We don't have the same kind of licensure and accrediting circumstances that Donnie would have in a healthcare situation. So ours is much more flexible, and which has been very nice for us and our students.
Great. Donnie, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Well, the concession that we got to reduce from 30 weeks minimum, 28 weeks minimum was back in the early part. I don't remember exactly when it came out, April or May. Starting in mid-March, I think pretty much all of us, in some cases through our program directors, and when I say all of us, we have a organization, it's called Florida Consortium of Clinical Educators. So, and then we also have other ACAP to other organizations where people involved with DPT program, clinical education get together. So we were pretty much all, sending questions to CAPTE, the accrediting body, about this and asking. Unfortunately, they got together and responded with that decrease minimum hours or weeks, very quickly. And that had a big role in our class of 2020 students being able to, all of them being able to graduate on time, because there were at least 6 or 7 that would not have been able to had CAPTE not made that concession. Now they are saying no more concessions for clinical education, but I know I already alluded to the fact that I'm hoping there's something having to do with the inpatient, with inpatient experiences. So we'll just have to wait and see, but I think we'll probably try to rally the troops again. And, depending on how things go in the fall, and possibly try to get groups together to press to see if there's something. I mean, none of us want people to graduate without having adequate experience, but at the same time, we're not expecting in Doctor of Physical Therapy program, ClinEd, for this to go away anytime soon. I think most people anticipate that the fallout from this will at least through 2021, if not into 2022, particularly because of this issue with inpatients. So we'll have to see how it goes, but hopefully they may make some sort of further concessions on that, rather than having huge groups of students throughout the country not be able to graduate on time.
Yeah, that would not be good if we have that happen.
No.
Yeah, every program takes a hit at that point, right? And so figuring out what's a common solution that can be adapted across for everyone. Hopefully they'll come to some conclusion on that for you all, and have some type of solution or recommendation that will be assistive. But okay, so for our final question, reflecting on the past few months, what lessons have you learned? And then what would you recommend to others who are responsible for these types of experiences for our students? And Donnie, you can go ahead and start. Hopefully you figured out the back and forth at this point.
Well, I want to tell anybody attending to, if you have not approached, you have students going out and you've not approached the general counsel office or your chair or dean, whatever you need to do, but keep in mind, and I'm saying this because I did not know this. I had in March, we had students out. I was finding new places for them to go. So we've had students continuously out without a break, different cohorts, but groups out since January, but since COVID, since March to the current time. I did not originally know back in March that students needed to sign a waiver. They needed to sign a release of liability from the university. That is not something we had ever done. All of our students go to spots that we have an affiliation agreement with, and much of the information is spelled out in the affiliation agreement. We have not had a release of liability before. I did not know we needed it. So I found that out, and it was like, I was told, why didn't you know that? I'm like, because I didn't. Been here almost 11 years and never heard this. So that is something that I would advise, if you haven't already done it. Everybody may have already done it. But if not, get with the general counsel or whoever you need to work on that, because it would be much better to give that to the students ahead of time than how I was doing it, where I was giving it to students who were already out there. And then I had some clinical sites who did not, they wanted their own version. So if that happens, then you need additional time too, because really if those things need to be in place and you don't have them in place, or they're being worked on, or the community partner has different ideas, then really the student shouldn't be there. So you're potentially losing time. So that's I know that's kind of getting into the weeds, but I just think that that's an important thing if someone's not aware of it. Another thing I'd say is I've learned to not give up. 3 days before one of the rotations started, I still had 5 students who didn't have a place. I think that was on like Thursday night, and it was due to start Monday morning. So I've definitely learned things that I thought just would not be possible to make happen. Actually did work out. And again, that goes back to, as much as you can, the regular communication with the clinical partners, acknowledging where they are, what are their concerns, what would make it possible for them to accommodate a student or not, and definitely acknowledging, you know, what they're going through also. And then I think for the future, I've already referenced trying to kind of design some things for the inpatient issue with sim labs, reflections, case studies, telehealth, you know, anything at all possible to look into how we can accommodate. And then also, and this is starting to happen on a national level in PT, is what is the right amount of clinical time or community time for students. Some DPT programs have 38 weeks, 40 weeks, 42 weeks. And then that means that maybe their students are accommodated. Other schools can't get their students in because time's taken up. So what is the optimal amount of community engagement, time and experiences? And like I say, that's starting to be looked at on a national basis and a state basis with us. And should we look regionally, or the way it is now, I have students go all over the country. Would it be better to have regional partnerships for the various universities and programs as well? So that's it for me.
Me?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Bobby.
Okay, well, I think my lesson learned is to be very flexible. I think we have to be flexible in this time. I also think that, you know, I encourage students to do their internships. I think some kids are still scared. They want to graduate, but do they really want to do this and do a face-to-face, or, you know, and they're afraid of remote, and I encourage them to embrace it and to go out there, because you know, this too shall pass, but we have to live in the moment where we are right now and what is happening right now. So I really do feel that we need to encourage our students to go and do what they need to do to get their internship. And as an internship coordinator, I have to be flexible in helping them reach those goals and working with those community sites so that they can reach those goals. I also just think communication is the key. One thing I've learned for myself is that I have to check my emails constantly. People, whether it's students or internship sites or whatever, my job doesn't stop when I'm just not teaching that day anymore. I'm checking them all the time, because that's when people communicate with you. And so it's a new environment in that respect too, because people are concerned, and so they want answers immediately as well. But flexibility is the big thing with me. I think that we have to be flexible, and that we have to know that this, you know, we're gonna get through this, and the kids are gonna still get some experiences. I also one last thing too that just came to me. I think that maybe we need to, at least in our curriculum, we have a pre-internship class that all the students have to take, and I would like to see maybe us even look at a remote component in that class. What it's like to be a remote learner, what it's like to have your internship or your job where you're totally working at home. So those may be future things that we may incorporate into our class as well, just so that kids can understand this may be the way it is for a while, and you need to know that you have to be professional. Just because you're on Zoom doesn't mean that you can always just be laying around in your pajamas and you know, with your laptop. You have to be professional.
Well, thank you both for those lessons learned, and not surprised that our communication faculty member stressed the importance of communication during this. So a quick little educational component for everyone on the tail end of this. So if you're not aware, NC-SARA, which is the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, it was developed to assist states and institutions to navigate educational requirements as more students flocked to distance learning. All states except for California are now a part of this group. Participation in the program is voluntary and allows UNF to offer its distance education programs to students in other SARA member states without going through those states' normal procedures and paying fees to obtain authorization approval to provide such offerings. So beginning in the spring of 2019, the participating institutions in SARA were required to submit an annual report to NC-SARA. And what they've reported is the number of their students engaged in certain experiential learning placements. So internships, rotations, clinicals, student teaching, experiential learning opportunities we've been talking about today. And they have to disaggregate that by state and by the 2-digit classification of instructional programs as assigned by the Department of Education. So what this means is that ultimately member institutions, which UNF is a member, cannot support the placement of more than 10 students from an individual academic program simultaneously at one clinical or practicum site unless approval for larger numbers provided by the host state. So, and every semester, UNF collects this information to make sure that we are in compliance with it. Now, with many of these types of experiences transitioning into virtual formats, there is a concern as to whether they're still going to hold to this 10-person maximum. But to this date, there had not been any changes to the requirement, meaning that schools are still limited to only 10 people being placed at these sites. If you would like to learn more about NC-SARA, we are going to post the website into the chat box. And then for our campus, we do have an individual who's responsible for collecting and reporting this information. That person is Patrice Capsio, and we're also going to post Patrice's information into the chat box as well. So if you do have any questions, you can reach out to Patrice and they can, they would be able to assist with that. So we just wanted to put that in there because as of right now, there haven't been any changes. There could be changes, but this is something that UNF is responsible to. So an example of this would be with Donnie and having students. She couldn't have more than 10 students in a same site doing a clinical rotation at the same time, which seems like it might not be an issue, but you never know. It could be an issue, right? Maybe not now, maybe in the future. But just something to keep in mind is something to know, and maybe not a lot of people know about it here at the institution, so we just wanted to share that information as well. Well, that's our time together. Doesn't seem like we have any questions from attendees, so want to, on behalf of the center, thank both of you for participating today. I felt like your responses were great and really informative, and hopefully as people do this in the future, we'll appreciate your responses and the work that you've done to help students navigate these circumstances. As an FYI, we will be hosting more of these webinars over the next couple of weeks as we're getting closer and closer to the fall semester. Our next one will be Thursday, July 30th. It'll be at 2 p.m. And Dr. Allery Gibbs will be moderating a conversation on options for reflection activities during COVID-19 teaching. We do have additional webinars that we are hosting, and the full list can be found at the virtual faculty lounge under the community-based learning module. And this webinar, along with all of our previous webinars, will also be posted there so that way they can be accessed in the future. One last thing is that the center is hosting various one-on-one consultations over the next few weeks. So if anyone's interested, they can sign up for an appointment using the link that was just posted in the chat box. That'll take you to a Sign Up Genius site where you can select an individual from our office to have a 30-minute session with, just to talk through some of the things you might be experiencing. And then finally, I just want to thank again everyone for coming today, for our panelists, and we look forward to seeing you at future sessions. And please share these opportunities with your colleagues. So, have a good afternoon, everyone, and
Thank
we
you.
will.
Thank you, guys.